And when I came to Australia, I was working in a research center in Latrobe University. The name was Research Center for Computer Communication and Social Robotics. And during that time, I did this research and published it in Journal of Human-Computer Interaction. Later, I worked and published it as a book chapter. And if you want to know what is it about, this is a tag cloud of the paper. As you see, elderly studies, SAR, research, well-being are the critical words in my presentation. Before I go to presentation, I want to tell you a story which became the motive of doing this research. When I was presenting my master's thesis, my master's final thesis, I claimed one of the contribution of my research is there were no prior research in the area that I was working. There were no prior research in that area. And one of the examiners said, no, that's not right, because I have published something. And I don't know why I couldn't find that paper, but it cost me half a score that time. When I was researching, I thought, okay, it should be a better way to cover all the previous research in one area if you want to do. And it was the motive of this research. I started introduction, then I will talk a bit about what is systematic review and the process I followed. By I mean me and the people working together. Some findings and how I can connect it to well-being, and at the end I will give some recommendations. As everyone knows, the population of the world is aging because of two main reasons. One is increasing longevity and declining in fertility. People live longer and they have less children. As the statistics show, the number of people over 65 per 100 children under 15 is increasing dramatically during the past years, especially in more developed countries. And the potential support ratio is declining. This ratio is number of people between 15 to 64 over 65 and above. So researchers started to work on some technologies to be replaced or help the process of caregiving. Some came up with biomedical devices, some others nanocells, some work on telehealth, smart homes, or the thing that I want to focus on is robots. You know better than me what's the definition of robot. A very powerful computer with powerful software in a mobile body which can act rationally. According to United Nations and International Foundation for Robotic Research, robots could be industrial, professional service, and personal service robots, which is somehow the focus of my study. In social robotics, we are thinking of a social entity, interaction with users, social interaction, and no need for particular training. And to narrow it down, about assistive robots for elderly, some researchers divided it to rehabilitation robotics and assistive social robots. And Brokens and others suggested this could be a simple categorization of robots for elderly care. One side, rehabilitation, the other side, service type and companion type. Among all the definitions, I focused on the conceptualization by Fairstaffer and Maturik. They said there is not any formal definition of socially assistive robots. So it is somehow the convergence of assistive robotics and socially interactive robotics to aid individuals or groups and for providing a specific assistance. Some applications could be social companionship, caregiving, assistantship, group play leadership, or some other applications. So, to do my review, I followed systematic review steps to make sense of large body of information in the area. Everything was very scattered, and I tried to identify where there is not enough prior research. So if I want to show you in a photo, there are lots of scattered research through process of sifting and screening. At the end, I was hoping to have an organized outcome based on my research review. The steps should be organized, transparent, and replicable. And there are some certain organizations just devoted to systematic reviews, especially in healthcare. The process that I followed, the principle in Cochrane Handbook for Systematic Review of Intervention, to present an integrated report on published studies in the context of elderly care. We include only English publications. Unfortunately, we couldn't include Japanese publications. There are lots of publications in Japanese, but we couldn't include them. We didn't limit our search to any date or year. We did it in January 2013 and then updated it in December. In our search, we started by some more engineering side databases, ACM and IEEE, and more general ones, ProQuest, Cirrus, JSTOR, and then some more in the healthcare, Cochrane, Medline, PubMed, Biomed, Cigna, and we did some general free search in Google Scholar as well. The terms we search consist of two parts, subject and context. Subject was robot, star. I guess you know what that star works. It could be replaced with any other alphabet. Robot, robotics, robotic, robots, and everything. Assistive devices, assistive technology, self-help devices, and also the name of robots we already knew. About the context, we include aged, elderly, senior citizens, old people, and dementia. Lots of research in the area is about people with dementia. We included all the associated medical subject headings, as well as database specific thesaurus. And we also included the reference of previous reviews in the area. In our
you didn't search on social?
Social? No. Because when we did social robot and the context, there were some certain papers that would be excluded. They didn't use the social. And they said, okay, at first we will have, instead of having a narrower database, we would have a larger database, and then we, in the next phase, we will narrow it down. In the first search, through the database searching, 800 something papers were, records were identified. In Google Scholar and reference harvesting, 878 records. And after deleting the identical records, 1,200 remained. The funny thing is, before doing that, I was thinking, okay, when you search something in the Google Scholar is enough. It includes all the other databases, but the results showed no. Around 30%, 40% are not included in the Google Scholar. And the next step was the screening. We did first screening based on the title. 2 independent reviewers scored each title. 0 for not relevant, 1 for relevant, and 2 very relevant. And we summed the scores together. If it was 0, we excluded that. If it was 1, we discussed whether to include it or not. And 2 to 4 as accepted. We did this step twice. One based on the title, second time based on the abstract. This is one of the forms we later used. Sima was the other researcher working on that research center. And after the first screening, 296 records remained, 127 after the second screening. So we extracted all the full text of these 127 papers. I read all of them.
I like the steps and I like the idea of doing a systematic review. I was just wondering whether you had a particular question, a particular hypothesis that you were looking for. These are all the papers in socially assistive robots.
More focusing on a special question. We were thinking a bit more general to gathering all the information related to socially assistive robots in elderly care. I think what is the body of knowledge in the area? No, not a specific question, but more general one.
So if someone develops, I don't know, a very technical component that allows a robot to move inside a room and this would be applicable for a socially assistive robot in elderly care.
As well as they have tested it in a field trial and measured the outcomes. Yes.
So there's an implicit question then of what the outcome is for people who interact with these robots. Okay.
Yep.
I didn't know pick up that.
After reading the full text, 95 papers remained. We calculated the Cohen's kappa for inter-rater agreement. It was good and very good in 2 consecutive steps. And we started to extract the data from the papers, included papers. We used the Peacock framework. We asked what the population, intervention, whether there is any comparison or not, outcome measures, and the context of the studies. This is one sample form. The year of publication, the type of publication, whether it's a conference paper or journal or book chapter or anything, the type of trial, whether it is field trial or any other types, the name of the robot, applications, aim of the study, where they have run that field trial, the intervention, duration, the measures they used, the country, the age of participant, the number of participants, whether they have mentioned how many male or female, the disease they may have, and the outcomes, and some other columns as well. So the funny thing was, when I was reading the papers, I saw, a kind of deja vu. When reading a paper, I thought, I have read that paper before. I said, okay, maybe I'm not right. And again, I find out that there are lots of papers that has published more than once. And I found out that there is they call it duplicate publications. And I like this cartoon. Shows that some people trying to show that they have done more than they have really done. Two extremes could be, one, some people published identical papers. I can say the radical one was, in one conference, in one session conference, two authors published one paper twice. They presented twice. In one, just changed the title and the order of authors. One presented one day, the other in the afternoon. And the funny thing was, in the presentation of the person A, the second person was the chair of the panel, and vice versa. And yeah, that's the extreme one. And there were some other somehow identical ones. There were some longitudinal studies they published at first year, and second year they mentioned that we already published the first year, but this is our new findings. And I somehow decided to group them together, group them as one study group instead of mentioning it twice or three times or more. So to do that detective work, I started to sorting by author's name, sorting by location, settings, and different types, and narrowing down the research. As you can see, they were not just publishing once or twice. They were one published 8 times, 11 times, or okay. To summarize what we have done, we started with this number of papers after first screening, after second screening, and 95 remained at the end, which I grouped them into 42 study groups. That means on average, each paper was published more than twice. And the findings. First, I can say only 25% of the publication in the area was in the journal articles, peer-reviewed journal articles, and most of them are conference. I don't know whether this is good or bad, but I guess when they are trying to publish on journals, there is no chance of publishing more than once. They usually check for that. There is not any certain pattern of the number of publications in different years. Number of publications decreased a bit. But when grouping the studies together, again, we can see that there is not certain pattern increasing or decreasing during the different years. But when putting all those information together, you can see now there are papers, if somebody runs a study, publish it once, but 10 years ago, people used to publish more than once the same study, and even more. And after grouping, I found out 27 of the papers published once, 7 of them published twice, 1 published 11 times, 1 9 times, 2 of them 8 times, and so on. Based on the robots that they have done the field trials, you can see Paro, I will introduce them later, has been studied more than the others, 11 study groups, which resulted in publishing 47 times. And you can see a certain number of people doing some research and published it 40 times, more than 40 times. And there are some studies that has done twice, but published 8 times. And I guess one contribution of my research could be people in the area should look more carefully when they are accepting a paper to be presented or published. Okay, first robot that came out of the review, the Paro. It was developed in Japan. It has light sensor, balance, speech recognition, sound source determiner. Have some actuators, not mobile, and around 2.8 kilograms. This is studied more than other devices because it's very easy for elderly. They are not confused when using it. Just touching it and trying to tuck it and change the direction of head and.
Is this for companionship?
Yeah. For now, everything is about companionship. The second one, the second robot is Abo, developed by Sony. And it has 18 degrees of freedom, lots of sensors, different sensors, especially the touch sensor. When they touch it, it starts to wag the tail and respond. The third one is Nekoro, a cat, developed again in Japan, and almost the same as previous ones. Bandit, developed by University of Southern California. The upper body torso on a wheeled motor. And it has 22 degrees of freedom. Especially they focus on the expression of the lips and eyelids. The next one is iCat by Philips. And they started to put something to connect to network and wireless. The next one, HealthSpot. It was a joint research between Auckland and Korea. And almost the same as previous ones. This is the one that we were working on, the Matilda, which is called Papero in Japan. And mainly developed by NEC and a joint project between NEC, La Trobe University, and University of Kyoto. And the only difference was the outputs, the kind of multi-modality of the robots. And these are the rest of robots. Brian, Ifbat, Navastak, Now, and others. As you can see, they are not very complicated robots. They are just for helping elderly to be engaged in some very minor activities. Most of the studies were done in Japan, 20 and a half, because one was joint between Japan and USA, 7 in USA, Italy, Netherlands. And as you can see, all of the field trials are done in more developed countries, not any other place. About the sample size, I grouped them together. 5 of the studies have between 1 and 5 people. 10 studies between 6 to 10 people. 10 of studies between 11 and 15. And usually they have very few participants in their studies. And 60% of the studies has 15 people or less, sometimes not conclusive. The other data that was gathered was the people. The studies usually mention that there are different stages of dementia. The studies were mostly done in nursing homes, daycare facilities, and retirement villages. There was not any way to compare different studies in terms of the duration of the study, because there were some with 1 session or 20 minutes and some of them 5 years. And there was no way to compare them together. Studies were mostly supervised and free interactions. They measured by observation, some self-report questionnaires, some questionnaires filled with caregivers, and there are a few objective measures like urine sample or EEG and other. Okay. When I wanted to write it down and in a way to be publishable, I thought it's not easy to put all the stuff together. I was trying to find a way to categorize the outcomes, and I decided to work on well-being theories. I selected the well-being theory by Seligman, 2011, the PERMA one. If you are familiar, he discusses that well-being is made out of 5 different constructs, interrelated constructs: positive emotion, engagement, relationship, meaning, and accomplishment. He claims when you want to improve the well-being of a person, at least one of these sub-constructs should be improved. And it's very well accepted in psychology and sociology, this theory. It is older than 2011. It was 2002, I guess. But he made some changes to it and improved it. First group of outcomes. It's about positive emotions, how individuals perceive their overall happiness. The included papers mentioned there is an effective positive emotion improvement. There is some improvement in feeling and moods. In my paper, there is a link which study is related to which of the outcomes. Increase in the sense of security and joy in life. The participant became calmer and revealed richer expressions, increase in laughter, and decrease in stress level. You know, there were almost no study that says the robot was not effective. All of them said, yeah, the robot is very effective, very good, we should use that. About engagement, they reported that they saw some evocative experience, externalize internal emotions more easily, increase in daily activities, perform movements actively, and motivated to do physical exercise. About relationship, their social interaction increased, decrease in loneliness, encouraged to communicate among themselves, and they started to make a friendship behavior with robots. About meaning, they mentioned that there is a decrease in depression and dejection level. Their life become more exciting and interesting, and there are some positive impacts on interpretation of the external world. About accomplishment, when they were doing some kind of one-to-one or group games, the elderly were feeling a sense of achievement, improvement in their perceived autonomy, improvement in response time. And there were some other outcomes. I couldn't put them in any specific subconstruct because they were physical. They measure their stress level directly, the activities of their brains, and some other stuff. There was only one study mentioned non-effective improvement of users' health. There were another study said potential negative effects could be raise the level of anxiety due to fear of breaking or doing something wrong with the robot. So, after putting all this stuff together, I thought maybe the research in the area seems very new, and the previous studies have some minor things that should be improved, which I named them threat to generalizability. It's very difficult for me to pronounce that. First, most of the studies done in Japan, they use animal-like robots. And according to some studies, culture and the shape of robot is highly related to how people perceive them. In some countries, they do not accept robots at all. But in some countries like Japan, they easily accept the new technology. There were only a few studies tested the robot at home, 2 or 3 out of all of them. Majority of the participants were female. I don't know why, but they tested almost 80% of the participants were female. And there were some certain study said gender is very effective on people whether accept a new technology or not. And usually men attract more easily, are more easily attracted to new technology, but after a short amount of time, they do not feel they're not interested anymore. There were inadequate understanding of stated and perceived expectation. None of the studies really measured what elderly want from them, what a robot should be to be accepted by them. Only a few studies included a stakeholder other than elderly, maybe the nurses, the family members, managers, or nursing homes, managers of nursing homes, or others. There were inadequate attention to person-centered care. They were very weak in terms of writing and reporting, and usually when you refer the paper to a person from healthcare or sociology, they say, no, we cannot read that, rely on that paper because we cannot understand anything. Full of engineering terms and not defining well enough. There were some minor contradictions and miscalculations in the papers. One paper was saying there were 10 participants, 5 men and 2 women. Okay, then. Or They said out of 100 participants, 40 of them seemed very interesting and 20 not interested. Okay, then what? What about the rest? And there were some miscalculations. From the methodology point of view, there were no randomized control trials. I guess it is not possible in many cases. There were not control groups involved. There are some biases because they couldn't do the double-blind or single-blind field trial because of the consent form. They let the people know that what are they researching. There were very low sample size. 60% of the studies have less than 15 people. Not any methodological attempts to reduce bias. Not attention to novelty effect and Hawthorne effect. And some recommendations. We concluded that there is need for a cross-cultural studies. There is need to compare different robots in one single study and see how people react to different types of the robots. Home-based trials are highly encouraged by government to keep elderly at home instead of spending time in elderly care facilities and putting too much pressure on government. I guess it would be good if they employ equal numbers of male and female participants, including other stakeholders other than elderly themselves. It should be good to focus on person-centered care and look from their viewpoint. I guess there were almost no evidence of somebody ask them really what do you want from a robot. Transparent reporting. Many of the reportings was in a way no one could understand how they run their trials or how could be improved. It would be good to use objective measures, not only subjective measures, observation, and use triangulation, measure from different points of view, from different angles, and check it. Some methodological attempts, such as propensity score matching to reduce bias, to do some longitudinal studies and some unsupervised studies to overcome novelty and Hawthorne effect. Estimating the sample size, not just saying we did it for 2 people or 100 people or 1,000 people. Why they have selected that sample size. It would be good if they develop some robots and some application to cover broader aspects of well-being. Robots should include new approaches such as cloud computing and web-based interfaces to overcome limited computing and storage capability of robots, and integrate with other technologies such as portable devices, blood pressure and other things, smart homes, and related websites. Now for questions and answers, if you have any. Yep.
Can you tell me about the material used to develop these robots? For example, for this Opero robot, the material seemed to be the
If I go back to robots, I could find, I cannot remember the name of the author. There were one researcher compared different robots together. They not really giving the elderly to test the robot or different people to test robot. They showed small clips of different robots and asked people which one they prefer. And somehow their preference was something, there were another robot. I couldn't find any evidence related to something between these two. And people preferred that robot, but nothing more I could find.
Nothing more about plastic or the material that is used?
No.
I've got a few comments.
Yep, that would be nice.
I think this is a terribly interesting topic, thinking about how robots fit within the lives of a particular population, and I know it's particularly popular for elderly people. I'm a bit disappointed that by this talk, I heard a lot about the process, and I would have loved to hear more about the findings of how robots enhance the well-being of elderly. And it was a very high level, and I would have loved to hear more about that.
Yep.
Those are just comments about the presentation. In terms of the recommendations that you make, there are a number of recommendations where I'm a bit concerned. One is about the cultural differences, and that you recommend to make cultural comparisons in studies, and I think I'm not sure whether that's appropriate to ask, and I think it's actually your job as someone who does the meter review to make this cultural comparison. You look at all the literature, you are in a position to make those, rather than putting that recommendation back to the authors.
Yep.
I've got a few other comments. Another concern was that there are no studies about what people want in terms of robots. And I'm sure you're familiar with HCI literature. It's a well-known problem that it's very difficult to gather requirements of a technology that isn't widely available yet, because we all find it difficult to imagine what the technology is going to look like. That happened when the telephone was introduced, and people were wondering, what do we do with the telephone? At first I thought, yeah, we used the telephone to submit operas, which was a stupid idea because the audio quality wasn't good. And
Yes.
a lot of companies rejected the telephone as a technology because they couldn't think what we could do. So it takes time for the technology to mature, to get adopted, and I think the same applies to robots that we're not in a state yet where we can run studies. It might be difficult to run studies where people imagine what their needs are.
May I give a small comment about that? Many of these robots are able to run different applications. But, there should be a priority which application is more important for people and which are not very important. Usually the application that they tested, the researcher thought that it could be useful to have this application. It should be good. It would be good if the robot can remind people to take their medicine. But almost no one, compare different applications together and decide which one is more important, or because many of these elderly cannot learn how to work with new stuff, and if they can prioritize which application is more important, they just focus on those applications.
Again, my question back to you. You're doing the review, you have all the findings of different studies.
Yes.
What do you recommend?
For me, this question was one part of my thesis. My thesis title was Expectation Management of Elderly from Social Robots. We build a chart of different stakeholders in one row, in the rows, and in the columns we have different applications, and we started to ask different people to rate them, which one is more important. From the elderly point of view, they only needed some robots that be able to talk to them, let them connect to their families and friends. A kind of, a smart telephone. Ask them, please read the news for me. And the robot do that, from their point of view. From the family point of view, it was completely different. They needed a kind of telepresence. They can see and become sure that their mother or their father is all right. From the other stakeholders, from the nurses, they preferred something to remind the elderly, go to sleep, go to toilet, go to, a kind of reminder. They needed a kind of reminder. Plus, somehow be interactive and make them, engage them in some daily activities.
That's interesting. I have one last comment. Maybe a question. There are two books on robots and social robots in particular that I found very interesting and influential. And they're both interesting because they provide a different perspective. Your perspective is a lot about we have a problem, people get older, we can't look for them, we don't have the money, how can we throw technology at them to solve that problem? And these two books present a different perspective. One of them is about, I can't remember the title, about why robots are much more popular in Japan than other countries, and you alluded to the cultural differences. And the notion is that in Japan they're not just utilitarian devices that replace the work that we do as human beings to look after other people. So I thought that was interesting. The other book is called Alone Together by Sherry Turkman. She's done a lot of research with PERMA in elderly care homes, and she looks at what these technologies bring, but also maybe what gets lost if we introduce technology, and how these technologies maybe create distance in the people around us and maybe isolate people in more. I think they could be useful, if you continue that research, I think it would provide a useful balance to the arguments that you're putting forward.
Yeah, the thing that we were talking about was the robot should be some kind of supporting the process of caregiving, not replacing that. But usually the younger people prefer to be engaged in some more fun stuff instead of taking care of elderly, or many of the elderly do not have anyone to do that for them. So, yeah, some research focus on replacing it.
Well, unfortunately, the time is over. Please join me thanking Reza.
Thank you.